Good morning and welcome to First Message. Now, First-Plymouth was founded in 1866, and they didn't offer a lot of digital content back then, but they had a clear mission statement. It was simply this: to increase the love of God and neighbor. And that's the purpose of First Message. You'll just hear a wonderful song and a good message, and we hope this increases the love in your heart.
Darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. No, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance, no. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not a captive to these lies. I'm not afraid to leave the past behind. I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. No, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance, no. Oh, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out the grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance, no. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
About 11 years ago this month, we brought home a 6-week-old Westie. We named him Oliver. Now, Oliver, at that time, had this habit of being in the yard and seeing a squirrel or seeing a rabbit, and when he did, his whole world would be centered on that rabbit, right? He would go up to the fence and he would just watch. The rabbit was long gone, but he'd stay alert and watch. Nothing else mattered except that rabbit could appear once again. And eventually he'd lay down. He might even take a nap, and when he'd wake up, he'd be fixated right on that spot again. Well, even now as an 11-year-old geriatric Oliver, he's still the same way. We're in a different yard, a different state, but if he sees a bird, or now in my yard we have chipmunks, if he sees a chipmunk, he runs to that spot at the gate, and just like when he was a little pup, he fixates on it. It's long gone, but 2 hours later you can come back and he's still holding ground. His whole world is caught up in that chipmunk could appear at that spot. Well, I've realized over the past 11 years, I'm similar in some ways. I can be easily just swept up, fixated on one thing for a long time. For instance, if I'm in my car and I have just random playlists playing, if I hear Amy Lee's voice, Amy Lee of Evanescence, so her voice is just incredible. Great songwriter, but just something about her. Like, if I hear her voice come on a song, like the playlists go to the wayside and I just start listening to Amy Lee songs, Evanescence songs. I'll spend the week listening to Evanescence like cover other songs or Amy Lee do interviews. Like my whole world is swept up in this thing. This past weekend, I got to show my boys The Sandlot. They got to see it for the first time. I think a normal family maybe could like just watch the movie, enjoy it, and their lives would move on. But every day since, we've been playing a lot of baseball, and we named Oliver the Beast, the big dog that captures the baseballs in the Sandlot. Like we quote lines from the movie constantly. It's like we're still in the movie. The movie's ended, but we're still in it. Our whole world is sucked up into the plot. Well, the same kind of habit, it operates for me when it comes to the church calendar. Pentecost has happened, but after Pentecost Sunday, people kind of move on. The church moves on. There's Trinity Sunday, and then it's summer. And we just kind of move on into doing summer things and summer topics for church. But I'm still sucked up in the world of Acts 2 and Acts 3 and Acts 4. Like I can't move on. I'm fixated. My whole world it's swept up into what the Holy Spirit is up to in this ancient community. And so I'm still there. I'm still in Acts. My morning prayer group right now, instead of following the lectionary, we're just reading through the book of Acts. We've only made it to chapter 4. But I'm fascinated to see when the Holy Spirit gets hold of a community, what happens? How does the Holy Spirit shape this group of people? How does it ripen something beautiful in the way people love one another? Well, let's get sucked up in that world for a little bit. Can we just fixate on the world of the Holy Spirit at work in this community? Let's look at Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2. Right after Peter gives this grand speech, right, to the whole group of people from lots of different nations and cultures that are there for the Feast of Weeks. Well, they're there. They witness the Holy Spirit being poured out on this group of disciples, and everyone's hearing them preach the gospel in their own tongue. And that's just happened. Peter's explained it to the crowd. And this is what comes next in Acts chapter 2 in verse 40. And he testified with many other arguments and exhorted them, saying, "Save yourselves." And then verse 41. So those who welcomed his message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 persons were added. That's a heck of a response to a sermon, just saying. Never experienced it. Verse 42. They devoted themselves, this new group of thousands of people, and the disciples that have been all baptized with the Spirit. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. It's really interesting when it says that they devoted themselves to this teaching and fellowship. Whenever I read that, I often just think about the Greek word, which is koinonia. It gets translated as fellowship, sometimes as communion. But when it says they devoted themselves to the fellowship, it's saying they devoted themselves to this deep intimacy, this sharing of life with one another. Koinonia, to say fellowship, to me, I almost get a picture of people hanging out together. And it can be that, but to devote yourself to koinonia is to share your deepest joys with one another. It's to share your burdens, traumas, to hold each other. I mean, it is a kind of deep connection. The New Testament talks about it among neighbors in community. It also talks about it between God and us, we sharing in the divine life, koinonia with God in the divine life and God in human life. I mean, it is intimacy and connection, communion at the most profound level. And after the pouring out of the Holy Spirit in Acts 2, this community devotes themselves to koinonia. Intimacy, fellowship, communion, sharing life together, holding each other in love. It's basically the communal version of loving your neighbor as yourself. Loving God with all your being and loving your neighbor as yourself. Koinonia. You know, University of Kentucky basketball, I'm kind of a big fan. You know this. Well, we had a pretty awful, terrible season last year. Didn't make the tournament. It was terrible. Well, what they did to get things back on track is that Illinois, they had like one of the best seasons they've ever had in 20 years. Well, Kentucky goes and hires their two best assistant coaches and brings them to UK. So University of Illinois, sorry, not sorry. We need them. So they just joined the Kentucky staff and hopefully can get success back in Lexington again. But I was listening to an interview with one of the new assistant coaches. And he was saying that one of his jobs is to really establish a meaningful relationship with the players. He says, I love my players. He says, I always tell them this. I spell the word love, Time. I show my love by spending time. It's like I spend time getting to know you, you getting to know me. I spend time with you in the gym. I spend time reviewing tape, improving your craft, but like you have my time. That's how I communicate love. You have to imagine that some of the ways in which people are devoting themselves to fellowship, to koinonia in this early community is loving each other through their time, through their time. You ever done a time audit on your phone? For those of you who have smartphones and spend a lot of time on it, you know, my phone, it has this readout of like what you spend your time on this app or this, or how much screen time you've had in the day. Whew. Take a look at that sometime. It is quite a trip to see just how much time is spent on that screen. If you don't have a phone that does that, just kind of survey, write down, journal a time audit. How you spend your time each day in a week. How much time is devoted to this, and this. And just consider the question, how could I express love, devote myself to koinonia by taking some of my time that was sucked up by this, but that I could devote to another person, a group of people. That might just be one way in which the Holy Spirit is breathing new life into us in our community. Well, one of the ways in which I've been sucked up in the world of Acts was I got this idea last week. You know, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint. I wanted to know, did the word koinonia show up anywhere in which those Greek translators were translating the Hebrew scriptures? And you know what? It does. The word koinonia shows up in Leviticus chapter 6. The Greek translation of Leviticus chapter 6. You want to know what it says? I hope so, because I'm about to read it to you. Here's what it says, Leviticus 6. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when any of you sin and commit a trespass against the Lord by deceiving a neighbor in a matter of deposit or a pledge, or by robbery, or if you have defrauded a neighbor, or have found something lost and lied about it, if you swear falsely regarding any of the various things that one may do, and sin thereby when you have sinned and realized your guilt, and would restore what you took by robbery or by fraud, or the deposit that was committed to you, or the lost thing that you found, or anything else about which you have sworn falsely, you shall repay the principal amount and shall add 1/5 to it. You shall pay it to its owner when you realize your guilt. It's a passage about reparations. That if you've sinned against a neighbor, either through theft, defrauding them, swearing falsely, if you've somehow gained something from your neighbor, and you realize your guilt, you realize what you've done, you are to repair it. You don't just say you're sorry. That's part of it. But if it's money, you give it back. And it even says you add 1/5 of the amount and give it back. Well, the Greek translators decided to use that Greek word koinonia, shared intimacy, fellowship, communion. This was the instruction on how to generate and maintain koinonia, to make repair. You know, Memorial Day, I was doing a 5K with different members of my family, and we went to the track of my high school, George Rogers Lark High School in Winchester, Kentucky. And as I was walking around the track, I started having these vivid memories. It was on the eve of June, right? May 31st. Pride Month was getting ready to start. We're now in it. And as I was walking around the track, I was thinking about how much my life has evolved, especially the way I went from being a fierce opponent of my LGBTQ sisters and brothers and neighbors to trying to be an ally. I started picking up scenes, flashbacks of memories in that high school in which I was such a jerk and a horrible human being to some of my LGBTQ neighbors, those who even hadn't come out, but I was joining in the chorus of making fun of my friends, although I don't know that they would have considered me friends. And I just felt that, you know what, part of what I think the Holy Spirit is nudging me to do is to try to make repair. Now, they may not want a relationship with me, but I've started making a list of people that I want to reach out to say, I'm sorry. And that I was basically a horrible human being and I made what must have been like hell for you in high school. I was a part of that hell. And I want you to know that here's what I'm trying to do to be an ally, to make this world better so that we can eradicate hell for anyone who's in that journey of coming out and discovering who God's made them to be. And they may not want to establish fellowship. They may want to say, you know what, I don't need you in my life and that's okay. But if there's an open door, I want to invest my time and try to build a relationship in the name of koinonia. It's part of what the Holy Spirit's up to, I think, in this world. Helping people devote themselves to fellowship, to koinonia. This is what God is. I think this is what God is trying to manifest in the world. So how is God breathing new life into you in the Holy Spirit? How can you devote yourselves to koinonia, to the fellowship, to intimate connection and love? Consider it. Do a time audit. Consider where there might need to be repair and just lean into it. Spread out your sails and let the Spirit take you. Amen.